Okay, welcome back. So, we had looked at the time independent Schrodinger equation written here, which was nothing but the spectrum, the eigenvalues and eigenvectors of the Hamiltonian or energy operator. So, the development of linear algebra and quantum mechanics in the language of linear algebra, that is done. I am done with that. This is essentially the only thing out of all of this that we will carry forward from this point on. So, you can in principle forget everything else, but I urge you not to do that. Okay. So, we have this equation, and naturally I have an exercise for you. Here is a Hamiltonian. Do not worry about this terminology yet, the meaning will be clear when I fill up the rest of the slide. But I have this Hamiltonian which looks like this. Can you tell me the spectrum? Can you tell me the eigenvalues and eigenvectors? Eigenvectors 1001 and the eigenvalue is epsilon 1 for both. Is that okay? Everyone agrees? Okay, so we will take that as unanimously passed by this house. So we have these eigenstates or eigenvectors and degenerate eigenvalues. Degenerate means that both of them have the same eigenvalue, identical eigenvalues. So that is called degenerate. So degenerate eigenvalues epsilon naught. Okay. Now let me sort of try to connect this Hamiltonian to a physical system. Imagine that I have two atoms, and do you at least vaguely recall the Bohr model for the atom with its many states that you got from solving the Bohr model? I do not need you to remember the details, just that you got many states. And now what I am asking you to imagine is that I have a much simpler atom which is only one state with energy E naught. So I have this one atom with one energy level, one allowed energy level E naught, and I have another identical atom far away, and of course since it is identical it has the same energy level E naught. And these are then, if I am thinking of those two together as one state, then this is the Hamiltonian and these are its eigenstates. So this one means electron resides completely on one atom, left atom, let us say my left. This state means the electron resides completely on the right atom. Okay. In both cases the eigenvalue, energy eigenvalue is E naught. These are identical atoms, allowed energy level is E naught. Now comes the interesting part. I start moving these two atoms close to each other. So they start seeing each other. They were far away, no interaction between them. Now they are coming closer. They feel each other. So now I have another Hamiltonian. These two terms capture the effect of the interaction between these two now. Okay. So let me also now explain why I use these two terms. Unperturbed means that you had this system which was not seeing the interaction. Now you have the interaction. Now it is a perturbed Hamiltonian. Okay. That is, we will let this terminology remain there, but this is now my new Hamiltonian. Can you tell me the new spectrum? Feel free to discuss amongst yourselves if you like. Hold on for a minute. Let others calculate, then we will see what is coming out. You are finding out the eigenvalues and eigenvectors. Okay. So I am claiming that to find out the eigenvalues, you have to solve this equation. This is the determinant of E naught minus E here and here, lambda here, this is 0, which means this of course reduces to okay. How do you get to the determinant being 0? This is the way that you solve linear equations using matrices. So, I am going to go back to my slide and show you the eigenvalues which we just calculated, and if you substitute these you can get these two eigenvectors. The 1 over square root of 2 is optional, all that it is doing is making this vector normalized, okay, that is all, but otherwise it is 1 1 and 1 minus 1, okay. This is as simple as an eigenvalue equation can get, simple 2 by 2 matrix. The consequence of what you have just done or what we have just done is quite monumental. So, go back to the example that I was giving you of two atoms single level coming together, and as they come closer they start feeling each other. So, these two levels, when they really start feeling each other, what happens to these two levels is that they split. One goes up by lambda, the other goes down by lambda. You have E naught plus minus lambda. This is called quantum mechanical level repulsion, and it is responsible for a lot of things including chemical bonding. Some of you might remember from school chemistry bonding and anti-bonding orbitals, which is exactly what you have here. The lower one is the bonding orbital, the upper one is the anti-bonding orbital. Some of you would have seen pictures of bands forming in solids, where you have, let us say, silicon atoms far apart. As they come together, this happens and then energy levels bunch together. Those cases are more complicated, but this is the basic idea there, that same level, when they come close they repel. So, then you have bands in solids, chemical bonding, all of this essentially arises from this quantum mechanical level repulsion. Notice what happens to the states. Earlier you had 1 0 and 0 1. So, these were essentially independent of each other. Why do I say that? If you take the dot product between them, that is 0. Now, you have 1 1 and 1 minus 1. So, now these got mixed with each other. So, when this happens on a more complicated, on a more complex scale, in chemistry you call it hybridization. When 1 S and 3 P mix together, that is hybridization. So, much of chemistry and solid state physics actually relies on this very simple eigenvalue problem that you have solved, okay. Good. So, let us come to solids. We are ready. I want us to consider a nearest neighbor tight binding model, more on this later, for a 1D chain of atoms, okay. So, and then 1D chain of atoms with periodic boundary conditions. Just remember this part for now, a 1D chain with periodic boundary conditions, okay. Here is my 1D chain of atoms. This is my very simple solid. It is a 1D solid, not a 3-dimensional solid, just a 1D solid. What is the other thing that you have to remember besides the fact that it is 1D chain? Periodic boundary condition. So, periodic boundary condition means that this atom and this atom are the same, okay. So, how do I do that? I do that by taking this atom and wrapping it here like you do a necklace, okay. So, now it has become like this, That is what periodic boundary condition means. Okay. Now I am going to go back here. So, what I have said here is that the position of the atoms is given by some integer times a, n is an integer and a is the spacing between the atoms. Okay. So, for n equal to 1 you have the second atom, n equal to 2 you have the third atom and so forth. And I have this condition that n plus 1 is equivalent to 1, this is the wraparound, the periodic boundary condition. I want us to spend a minute on thinking about what it means to apply this strange condition, the periodic boundary condition. I had a solid, 1D solid, and now I have wrapped it around, so I just have a chain. What does this physically mean? Can I have some just random thoughts? What do you feel has really happened there in physical terms? What is the difference between this chain and the thing with the periodic boundary conditions where it has become closed? What is the difference? Can you guess? Random guesses are okay. You must give me something, otherwise I am not moving. What is the difference between the chain laid out in a line and wrapped around? This is 1D, so give me simple answer. There was something else? Open and closed. One was open at the ends, the other had boundaries, two boundaries on two sides. Once I close it, there are no boundaries. That is exactly right. That is the point. In solid state physics, it is a very common boundary condition. Most of solid state physics that we do relies on applying this boundary condition. It actually relies on applying these boundary conditions in all three directions. So, you have a big solid, you take this end around and wrap it, so that there is no boundary left, and not just in one direction, but all three directions in a way that I cannot really draw for you, but there is no boundary left. Why? Why do I have a problem with boundaries, with surfaces? Why do I want to close it off? That is also exactly right. So, I want my entire solid to look like a bulk material. If you go to the surface of a material has different properties than the bulk. If I apply the periodic boundary conditions, then I am studying only the bulk. If you want to study the surface, that needs to be a separate study. If I want to study the bulk, apply the periodic boundary condition, which is why we are doing it. Okay, good, thanks. So, now we can proceed. So, I have this 1D chain, I want to write down the Hamiltonian for electrons which are living in this solid, okay. And this is the model that I have for the energy of electrons living in this solid. It is called the nearest neighbor tight binding model. So, what do I have here? Remember, these n's, the number n is an index for the atomic position, okay. So, for atomic position n, I have a certain energy E naught, and this is true for every position n. First atom, electron is there, it has this much E naught. I am calling it an on-site energy, energy to be at a particular site. Then there are some other terms. This connects n and n plus 1, an atom and its neighbor on the right. This connects an atom and its neighbor on the left, and there is some energy called nearest neighbor coupling or nearest neighbor hopping, okay, energy for nearest neighbor coupling ESS, which connects each atom and its nearest neighbor. That is why nearest neighbor tight binding model, okay. These are the three energy terms, and this summation says that we have these energy terms for every atom in the solid. Questions? Is this okay? So, I'll finally try to calculate the the energies that an electron in a solid is allowed to have. So, let me maybe race a few steps ahead and ask you whether everyone has seen or heard of energy band diagrams in semiconductor devices, in diodes, energy bands, right. So, there you draw allowed energy as a function of position, okay. And is anybody familiar with EK diagram, energy versus momentum EK diagram? Okay, that is fine. So, that actually tells you what are the allowed states and allowed energies for electrons to have, essentially solutions to the Hamiltonian for a solid. We are actually trying to construct a model for electrons in a solid, that is our end goal. To achieve some physical understanding, we are using the simple 1D model, then we will go 3D and very sophisticated. Those calculations are difficult to do by hand, so you will do those in the tutorial in the afternoon in our computer lab, but this 1D chain, this we can do by hand, we will do it right here, okay. Okay. So, this is now my Hamiltonian, this is a model Hamiltonian. I do not actually know whether this is indeed the correct picture or not, that will remain to be seen. I will make some predictions based on this that will have to be compared against experiment, and that will tell me how good my model is, how good a model this is. It turns out this kind of model is not too bad, but just to keep things simple at the outset, this is what we are going with. So, in matrix form, this is the way in which I can write down the Hamiltonian. The columns here are indexed by the atomic positions and the rows are also indexed by the atomic positions, okay. So, I fill these out when 1 1 means one of these elements on site energies, okay. So, at all the diagonal elements are E naught, which are the on site energies for every point, and nearest neighbor, that means on the right and on the left you have the nearest neighbor coupling terms ESS. So, you have a row of a diagonal element, a diagonal of leading diagonal of E naughts and the side diagonals of ESS. So, it is a tri-diagonal matrix, everything else is 0 other than at these two ends where I have some terms because of periodic boundary condition, because I have wrapped it around, therefore, there are some terms here. So, this is my Hamiltonian, I need to solve it. If I had to solve it formally, then the way to solve it would be to apply a discrete Fourier transform, but I do not want to get into that, I want to keep things simple. So, what we will do is we will solve this equation. So, we will convert this equation into the position basis, in which case as you have seen this state vector just becomes a wave function psi n, and I have still an eigenvalue equation. So, Hamiltonian on this side acting on the wave function at a particular site and its nearest neighbors, and on this side I have the eigenvalue E that I need to find. Psi n is the eigen function now, because I have gone to position basis, the eigenvector has become an eigen function, but it is in principle it is the same. This E is the eigenvalue I need to find, okay. E is what I have to find. This is the equation I need to solve here. So, instead of taking the formal route of a Fourier transform, we will gain more insight by taking a slightly different approach. Let us test this equation, this form of solution. Essentially some constant, the wave function is some constant times a plane wave, e to the power I, and then n a, remember, is the atomic position, n equal to 1 is the first, n equal to 2 is the second, and so forth. So now I will substitute this into this equation. Remember, when the index n changes, the exponent here will change because I have an n here. So when I have psi n plus 1, I need to have n plus 1 here. Okay. So that is what I put here. This term gives me just e to the power I k n a. For this term, I have n plus 1. So I take e to the power I k n a, and separately I get a e to the power I k a, okay, from the 1 here. Similarly, from the minus 1 here, I get a e to the power minus I k a. Okay. Now I can take psi naught e to the power I k n a out of the entire thing, and that cancels out with this here. So then I am left with E equals E naught plus ESS times e to the power I k a plus ESS times e to the power minus I k a. This I can of course write as cos k a. For specific values of E naught and ESS, this is a plot that I have which shows you E as a function of k or ka actually. This is what is called a EK diagram. An EK diagram is essentially an energy versus momentum diagram, because remember that h bar times k is momentum. Okay. Is this relationship familiar? If not, then I will quickly remind you that in explaining the photoelectric effect, Einstein had said that we must think of photons as having energy equal to h times nu, which is nothing but h bar times omega. Omega is the angular frequency, and then the momentum corresponding to that is h bar k, where k is the wave number, right. So photons are actually known to have momentum, and the relationship between these two is just this. This actually follows from the fact that the speed of light is equal to the frequency times the wavelength. So if I multiply by both sides by h, then I have this, and if I take lambda to this side, then I have this, and this is nothing but energy. So that is, and this is momentum. So this is energy and this is momentum. So this relation actually follows from basic relativistic physics, and this you had from the photoelectric effect for photons. This is a relation that actually works both ways, meaning it works like this or it works like this. If it is a photon, then you know the wavelength and you can get its momentum. If it is a particle like an electron, you know its momentum, you can get its wavelength. And this is why we say, in modern physics, quantum mechanics, that things behave like both particles and waves, and this is the relationship that sort of combines the wave and the particle nature of any particle. But what is important for any kind of particle, microscopic particles, is this E versus K relation. This is the signature of the property of the particle. If it is photon, what kind of relationship is this? What kind of graph would I get here between energy and momentum? It will be what? P is h bar k, right. So, I have C, this is h bar k. So, it is just a straight line, okay, with a slope which is h bar c, okay, slope is h bar c. For electrons, it is something different, and all of the electronic properties of a solid, or almost all of the electronic properties of a solid, follow from what kind of EK relationship the electron has when it resides inside the solid. So, one of the most important things we want to know about a material for electronics or electrical engineering applications is this EK relationship, sometimes called the electronic structure, sometimes called the band structure, but that is one of the most important material properties that concern us. Now, one of the things that I want to point out is, typically we did not have to worry about material properties. Our friends in material science departments worried about the material properties, then we took the materials and used them in devices. Now, it so happens that I am in the semiconductor device area, and we find that we need to know more and more about material properties because we are using so many different kinds of materials these days in advanced electronic products. I mean, earlier it was just silicon chips doing computing, then we needed communication, right. So, you needed lasers for optical communication, that needed some different kind of material. And those two came together, computing and communication came together to give the IT revolution. And then not just computing and communication, but all sorts of sensors come together in your cell phones to give you so many interesting things. So, that requires an even broader plethora of materials. Next generation phones maybe will even combine energy harvesting devices. So, we only have to charge them once a week, not twice a day. That will surely require even newer materials. So, as electrical engineers, we are concerned more and more with the properties of materials. Hence this lecture, but this is what I have here on the slide, the EK diagram that I have. This is simplest example of the electronic structure or band structure of electrons in this simple 1D chain. Okay. We will look at realistic examples of this in a little bit and then later on in the tutorial. Now, one of the most important properties that comes out of this band structure is the so called effective mass. How many people have encountered this term before, effective mass? No, that is fine. So, the effective mass is the mass with which electrons move inside when they are inside a solid. The rest mass of electrons, 9.1 10 to the power minus 31 kg, that is for free electrons in vacuum. When electrons are inside a solid, they behave differently because they are seeing all of these potentials due to the positive ions and all of that. And the net effect of that is to make electrons move with a different mass, which is called the effective mass. And I do not really want to make this about solid state physics, but this is the way in which you get the effective mass from the EK relationship by taking this second derivative. So, can you tell me for this kind of EK relationship that I have here, E is E naught plus twice ESS times cos Ka, what will be the effective mass for electrons in this solid? At the band minimum, what does this mean? This means that when Ka equal to 0. So, you will have to take a second derivative at a particular point at some particular K. So, take it when Ka is 0 or K is 0. Okay. What is the answer? Louder? Yeah, I know you have it. Okay, so you just take the second derivative and do this. Okay. So, very simple. Once you have the band structure, to get the effective mass is very simple, but this is very powerful because electrons in solid, once you have this effective mass, then you can essentially forget about the quantum mechanics. That is the power of the effective mass. After that, you forget all the quantum mechanics and say electron is a classical particle. Only thing to keep in mind, it moves with this effective mass instead of m naught, the rest mass.
Does the velocity also change?
The velocity is to be found as 1 over h bar dE decay. So, the velocity also comes from this picture itself. I am not getting into that, but it follows from here. So, once you have the this EK relationship, all the electronic properties are essentially known. But mostly traditionally we as, let us say, electronics engineers, we have not concerned ourselves with the material properties. This used to be given to us, the EK relationship, and it sufficed to just know what the effective masses were, then we could run with that. But with new materials coming in, it is in our interest to know about material properties also.
The theory of relativity by Einstein. Theory of relativity.
Mostly relativity does not have much of an impact on this. There is a small effect which I am not getting into here, but mostly relativity does not really enter in a big way here because the speeds are generally not that high. There is a small correction that comes in the electronic structure in E versus K relationship, a small correction, but otherwise it is not a really important effect. Mostly it is all quantum mechanics. And the power of the effective mass, once you have the band structure, take this second derivative, after that you can even forget about the quantum mechanics. Okay. So, now we know the 1D picture. 3D just looks complicated, but it is the same. Okay. Because it looks complicated, we will do it on a computer, but I sort of want to run you through it a little bit. So, what is the picture here? Earlier we had this matrix, this was first atomic position, second atom, third atom, and so forth. Here this is essentially all one atom. This Hamiltonian is just for one atom. So, it is a little more complicated. And why do I have this? To see that, let us look at these pictures, because what I have here is the nearest neighbor something something tight binding model for zinc blende lattice semiconductors. Zinc blende is like diamond lattice. Everybody remembers diamond structure, school, right? And if neighboring atoms are not the same, then it is zinc blende structure. So, same geometry, but neighboring atoms are different, zinc and sulfur, that is zinc blende, or it could be gallium and arsenic, then it is also zinc blende structure. But silicon has the diamond structure. So, this structure is very important. Most of the important semiconductors come in most of the important semiconductors come in this structure. So, how do we form, how do we get this kind of diamond lattice or zinc blende lattice? From sp3 bonding. The way that happens, you have two atoms coming together, and you can't read this, but the s orbitals on them overlap to give you a what is called a sigma bond, and s orbital and the p orbital can again combine or hybridize to give you a different kind of sigma bond. And when I say hybridize, remember that I am talking about the mixing that you derived using the simple 2 by 2 matrix, where the eigenvectors mixed. They were 1 0 0 1 and they became 1 and plus minus 1, they mixed. This is just that mixing going on. When two atoms come close together, these two mix. When two p orbitals on neighboring atoms come together, they mix. Two p orbitals like this come together, they mix. This kind of mixing is called a pi bonding, this is called a sigma bonding. So, what I have here is see A is the anion if I have gallium and arsenic, let us say gallium arsenide or zinc blend. So, here I have actually I do not have one atom, I have two atoms here. A stands for the anion and S stands for C stands for the cation. So, this is the energy, on-site energy for anion and anion, on-site energy on the anion site. This is on-site energy at the cation site. These are coupling between s orbital of cation and s orbital of anion. Okay. Coupling means like this, s orbital of anion, s orbital of cation, and like this I have all possible combinations, which is why it is a big matrix. P orbital on one atom mixing with s orbital here, s orbital here mixing with p orbital here, p orbitals combining mixing like this, p orbitals mixing like this. So, there are all possible combinations. This x, y, z are the p orbitals, px, py, pz, and then I have s star orbitals. These are just the anti-bonding orbitals. Remember I said when two levels come together, then they split, lower one is bonding, upper one is anti-bonding orbital. So, why do we need this? Why do we need the anti-bonding orbitals? Because remember in a semiconductor you have valence band and conduction band. Conduction band is the excited state. For that, to get that accurately, we need the anti-bonding orbitals. Okay. So, when these all of these combine, they give you this kind of structure, this kind of bonds, the sp3 bonds, and you will recall that I have one atom here, one atom here, 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 here. So, this is the basic tetrahedron that you have in diamond. Okay. This is the Hamiltonian that describes that. I am not going to spend any more time on this one, because we are actually going to solve it in the computer lab, because I can't solve this Hamiltonian by hand. The 2 by 2 Hamiltonian was okay, this one not. So, let us move on. What we need to do with this Hamiltonian, see this Hamiltonian you have to notice has some k terms. See here there is a g naught, here there is a g1, and these g naught and g1 they have e to the power I k times some distance. These distances are nothing but these bond lengths. Okay. But the point, my point is that there is k. K is the same k that I need in the E versus k relationship. For every k, I need to find out E. That means here for every k, I need to diagonalize the Hamiltonian and find out its eigenvalues. When I do that, then for every k, consider this k, for every k I get 1, 2, 3, 4, a bunch of eigenvalues, and all of these are possible energy states for electrons to be in. Each of these is called a band, an energy band, okay, and electrons can be in this band or this band and so forth. In particular, in this picture, this one right here is one of the valence bands, and this one right here is the conduction band for gallium arsenide. You know about conduction and valence band. Usually you have seen conduction and valence band as a function of position. This is what it looks like in terms of E versus K, energy versus momentum. You get all of these bands, and this is going to be your exercise for the tutorial in the afternoon, to get these, to be able to get these bands yourself by diagonalizing the Hamiltonian. So, one question that you could ask out of here is, what is the range of k? Here I have taken the easy way out and said that k as a fraction of maximum value. So, it goes up to +1 and -1, but actually what is the maximum value? So, to understand that, one really needs to get into solid state physics. Let me see if we can just quickly do that in 1 minute. A good regular solid, an ideal solid, is a perfectly periodic structure, right? Periodic arrangement of atoms. That periodicity means, it implies, and I am not going to go into how and why, but it implies that you can label these k values, the k states, in two ways. One is in this way, and I am drawing an EK diagram in both cases, on top and at the bottom. The one on the top, the EK diagram on the top will show you the regular kind of E versus K relationship with little breaks in here. These breaks, by the way, are band gaps, they are band gaps, but this is your E versus K. There is another way to plot it which is more compact. So you have to be a little more careful with it, but it is more compact and that is sometimes more convenient, and that is you just plot it between these two vertical lines here. What you do is this branch that you have, you just move it horizontally to here and it comes here. This branch, move it horizontally to here and it comes here. So you get, instead of E versus K continuing all the way, you keep the K confined within some range, but you keep adding many bands vertically. So that is what we have done here. But this tells you sort of what is the range of K. If I have a one dimensional solid with interatomic spacing of A, then the range of K, the maximum value of K is pi over A, okay, in this one dimensional solid. So that is the range of K, done. When you talk about a 3D solid, then this range of K gets very much more complicated and very interesting geometrical shapes come into play, like this so called truncated octahedron. So then you need to decide, now there is kx, ky, kz, and you need to, when you are drawing a plot like this, you need to decide in which direction you are going to look at k. So it is E versus K, but K in which direction. So in particular here you see on the right hand side I have plotted K in the x direction, and I will tell you what is the x direction. Now the left hand side in the L direction. So x direction is just from the center is called the gamma point, to one of these square rhomboidal faces, center of this face, and L point is the center of this hexagonal face. So in one case I am plotting E versus K in this direction, and in the other case E versus K in this direction. So once I have E versus K, you have plotted a relationship like this, how do you get effective mass? See, in the earlier case I gave you a relationship cos Ka, so you are able to differentiate and get. In the lab you will get a table of values K and E. So you will need to do the derivative, the second derivative, you will need to do it numerically. Have you done that, numerical differentiation? So the way that you do it numerically is, remember that right. So if I have x and y discrete values, okay, and I wanted to evaluate dy dx, I can do it approximately by taking differences y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1, but let us assume that these differences are just delta x uniformly, okay. So then this by delta x, and the next derivative will be this divided by delta x. So these are called finite differences, and if delta x is small, then this is a good approximation to the derivative, okay. That is what I am showing you here, an approximation to now the second derivative. This is the first derivative, and now I have taken the difference of that, so that gives me the second derivative. Now as you can see, so this is what you will do in the tutorial. Now as you can see, I have told you that if the E versus K is going differently in different directions, then if I calculate m star by taking second derivatives, that will also be different in different directions, right. So m star is direction dependent, and also m star is actually K dependent, right, because the second derivative here will not be the second derivative here, okay. So these two are important points, which is why I need to tell you where you find out the second derivative. Usually this second derivative is to be, the effective mass is to be found at the minimum or maximum point of the band here, at the minimum point or the maximum point, okay. So I am nearly done. The rest of the material I have will take a few minutes, and it is more in the nature of general knowledge, okay. So sit back and just enjoy. So we find out the effective mass, and what do we do with it? I mean, in let us say semiconductor device engineering, where you are looking at all of this stuff, what do we do with it? I told you that with an effective mass, you are able to essentially forget about all the complicated quantum mechanics. So here is how it works. Imagine an electron inside a solid, and you have applied an electric field, so that you get a current out of it then. But I want to understand how is the electron moving when you apply an electric field. It is a very important question for us, because in all of electronic devices, that is what we are doing, applying a voltage, getting a current, right. So you know that if I have a charged particle like an electron in an electric field, then the charged particle will accelerate. This is just Newton's second law. Is this clear? Acceleration is force, this is electric field times charge, this is force divided by the mass. So this is the acceleration, and this is what I meant by the power of the effective mass. I have Newton's second law, but instead of the regular mass of the electron, I have effective mass. Once I make this substitution, replace the real mass with the effective mass, then I can merrily go along with Newton's second law. That is the power of the effective mass. You can forget about quantum mechanics and just go with Newton's second law now. Good. But you do know that an electron in a solid, you apply an electric field, it does not keep on accelerating. It attains a steady drift velocity, okay, a steady velocity, drift velocity it is called. That is because in addition to this acceleration, there is also a friction which introduces an equal amount of deceleration that balances out the acceleration. So this friction, and the friction happens because of the scattering of the electron due to imperfections in the solid. That friction term is again proportional to the velocity, and then there is some constant. So this is the friction term, it is proportional to the velocity, and this constant is just the average time between scattering or collisions that the electron encounters. So this is the friction term. So this is my full equation that describes the dynamics of the electron. If you now look at steady state means there is nothing happening with respect to time. So this term goes away, vanishes, dv dt is not there. So then, and my velocity attains a steady state drift velocity, which I am writing as Vd. So then I write Vd as q e m star, and tau goes to this side. Take the electric field out, and you get the drift velocity is proportional to the electric field, and the constant of proportionality is something called the mobility. Familiar? Mobility in semiconductor devices. So this is where it comes from. It has, notice what the mobility has, it has the average time between collisions on the top and the effective mass at the bottom. So for the last 10, so what is the use of all this, right? One is, of course, it lets you prove Ohm's law, because once you have this, you know that the current is nothing but number of particles times the velocity, or density of particles times velocity. This is current density. So now replace drift velocity by this relationship, and you get current proportional to electric field. This is Ohm's law. Okay. More real world, for the last 10 years or so, we have sort of done engineering with this to improve the semiconductor devices that go into your computers. Okay. This is a semiconductor device. Can you tell me what kind of semiconductor device? It's a MOSFET. Is everybody familiar with a MOSFET, a MOS transistor? So here is source, here is drain, this is the gate. And what I am showing you here is that instead of all silicon, the source and the drain are now made with some other material, alloy of silicon and germanium. What that does is it compressively strains the silicon here, as shown with these arrows. It compressively strains the silicon. When that happens, because the atomic positions are changing, the electronic structure EK diagram also changes. That means the effective mass changes. In fact, the effective mass goes down and the mobility increases. So electrons move faster when you do this, which is why for the last 10 years in your computers, laptops and mobile phones, this is what has been going on in the PMOS, this training with silicon germanium source drain to give you faster devices so you can play video games on your mobile phone. Okay. So that is what quantum mechanics lets us do, lets us play video games on our mobile phones. Okay. So very important therefore. Next generation, what people want to do is, I don't know if you can see this, we want to replace the silicon in here with materials that have even higher mobility. So look at silicon properties here, band gap, electron mobility. This is electron mobility in bulk silicon, this is gallium arsenide. Look at how much more the electron mobility is here. So people want to make transistors with this channel material. Therefore, in the tutorial you will calculate the electronic structure of gallium arsenide and find out its effective mass, and that will tell you why it is so much better than silicon and why people want to make the next generation transistors with gallium arsenide. I think that is all I have. You have any questions? So it's yeah.
One of the slides there was something that calculated using Fourier transform.
I did not actually, so I took a shortcut. Let me get to that slide. So here I had to calculate the energy eigenvalue for this Hamiltonian. I said the formal way to do it would be to take the Fourier transform. What I did is instead said that try out this kind of plane wave solution, which is just one term in the Fourier transform. So I took the shortcut out and just did what is called harmonic analysis, just take one sinusoid and see what comes out of that. But
traditional way is through Fourier transform.
Yeah, it's actually very simple. I just didn't want to get into Fourier transform here. You can apply such kind of Fourier transform to this Hamiltonian and you get the same answer, of course.
Put some light on the Fermi level.
Yeah, okay. I won't throw a lot of light on the Fermi level, but a little bit certainly would be in order. Yeah. So everybody has heard of the Fermi level? Yeah, the Fermi level decides the population of electrons. So once I give you this band structure, realize what we have in our hands. What we have with this is a way to tell what are the allowed energy levels. What are the allowed energy levels? This is here. It is similar to where are the chairs in this room. It does not tell you which of the chairs are occupied. That information comes from statistical mechanics, in particular captured by the Fermi level. So if this room were if this room were a metal and I said okay, Fermi level was there, third bench, then all of the chairs after that would be occupied and all of the chairs here would be unoccupied. That is the information that the Fermi level gives you. Okay. But where are the chairs? That is what we have from quantum mechanics. That is what we have here. Does that clarify? So in this figure, for instance, I need the figure up here. So the numbers in the Hamiltonian matrix are calibrated so that this 0 is actually the Fermi energy. No, I take that back, sorry. This 0 is actually the top of the valence band. Okay. Now, if the Fermi, so for most semiconductors, the Fermi level would lie somewhere between these two. So that this would be the valence band and this would be the conduction band. If it so happened that the Fermi level was lying at 10 eV, then all of these bands would be occupied with electrons and only this band would be half occupied. It would be occupied up to here. These states would be empty, these states would be filled, this would be a metal. Okay. In this case, if the Fermi level lies somewhere here between 0 and let us say 1 or 2, then it is lying between two bands and you get an insulator or a semiconductor. Okay. Any other questions? That is a very good question, I should have had that, thank you. So, I hope it is very clear how we get from vectors in Hilbert spaces to video games on your mobile. Thanks again for your attention.